Latvia expects a Christmas present this year, closing of the programs and to continue to solve the situation on our own. Do you see there is any possibility that this could not happen this year?
Well, first of all, I don't know whether you should call it as a present, because it looks like what has happened in terms of our participation is something which needs to be finished and then make you very happy that what is important is that the adjustment to the country is taking place, and therefore it's really on its way to improve the situation. And therefore the country is already in progress to get on much better economic growth prospects and much better fiscal consolidation achievement. Therefore, I mean, the fact that the program itself formally finishes now before Christmas, just for the IMF and for us just afterwards, in a way marks an end of a process, but doesn't mark an end to the ongoing improvement, which I think continues, and I think it's important to work to make it continue.
But you're saying formally ends the process. What does it mean? This means you're not leaving like the one is saying, we are saying, politicians are saying, expecting, okay, now we have some freedom.
Well, as concerns the Commission, is a bit a different situation as the IMF. I mean, we have been in the country before, we continue to be in the country, we have a permanent office there, which is acting very much in terms of informing what the Commission is doing. But in particular, the Commission and the EU is there, you know, with structural funds, the agricultural policy, and many other policies. This is one specific aspect of your cooperation within the EU, of your participation, the fact that you had to ask for some help on a financial point of view. This involved as well the IMF. The IMF came now for 3 years. They opened an office for this purpose, and they will have to close it at one point because this kind of support will be ending. But in any case, it doesn't end fully because there will be what we call the post-program surveillance. Now we'll be moving from a very close monitoring and very, let's say, intrusive to some extent participation in the activity of the country to what is for the rest of the EU the normal surveillance, which is under the so-called European semester of budgetary surveillance, this Europe 2020 reform strategy, where in fact we continue to monitor the country, we continue to do regular visits, normally a couple per year. But we will be in between these two situations, so we'll have what is called the post-program surveillance, and that means that we'll have some more enhanced surveillance than the normal one, but much lighter than the one we had before. What is important there is that there is a good dialogue, sharing of information, and in particular, I think would be good for the country to continue to seek the advice of from the Commission and also the IMF, because I think that is really was the added value of the last 3 years that we've been there, supporting the country in taking the decisions, in delivering the objectives which the country set for itself.
The way Latvia came out from the crisis, do you call it as well as a success story?
It is a success from many points of view. I think it's a success in terms of adjusting in a very difficult context, first international, trying to preserve some anchors which were driving the policy of the country for the last years, in particular the peg on the exchange rate. The fact that the country is already back growing and is back growing from a level which is still higher than the period before the crisis. So it is success also in how the adjustment has taken place within the country. I think socially it's been there's been much more acceptance of the adjustment. I think this attribute should be given to the population because they've accepted that the party had to be over. There was a big party which was beyond the means. And in spite of the difficulty and the pain of the adjustment, they've accepted it, and they've also worked supporting also those who have been driving this change, in particular the government, which has been in the last 2.5 years, pushing in the direction of transforming the country to make it sustainable and socially more able to grow.
But so far, how do you see how qualitative those changes have been?
Qualitative, well, there's been a readjustment on many fronts. I mean, on the fiscal side, there were very large underlying deficits which have been were built during the boom, and in fact they appeared once the boom stopped and there was a crisis. So there's been a very strong change in the quality because there is a better planning, there is also now work, and it's ongoing in terms of having a better fiscal framework in taking the decisions. There is also in the quality of the budget has also changed. There has been a shift of taxation, for example, from some type of sources, in particular taxation on labor. Now has been some movement away to increase taxation on other forms, which are less damaging on other sources, which are less damaging for the economy, like real estate taxation, also VAT, which taxes consumption, which was where the problem was. There was too much consumption. Also on the spending side, I think there's been a lot of waste which has been reduced, many subsidies, grants. I think also the public administration, big reform has been made in many sectors, specifically in health sector, education, where in fact there were too many resources per pupil, for example, in this, or too many beds per sick people. So this has brought the country closer to European standards. I think still there's some room to go. But there's been much more efficient way of delivering services. Like, for example, now there's much more outpatient care in hospital rather than having people sleeping in hospitals for days, which is very costly. And the public administration the same. There's been quite a big reduction in number of people, where in fact there was no real necessity to have so many people. But there, I mean, also some work is needed, and we're discussing the government in order to make sure that the pay remains high enough across the public administration to motivate the people.
But there is still a lack of reforms.
No, lack of reforms, I would not say so. I mean, I think there's been quite many reforms which went together with the budget adjustment. Now, of course, more could have been done, and I think in particular the last year with the political difficulties, the fact there's been new elections, I think less reforms than we expected have taken place. Now, there are some areas, for example, where we encourage the government to go ahead. It's, for example, the governance of the state-owned enterprises, where in fact some problems might arise, and I think Air Baltic is a very clear example. But also we think that there's a lot of money which is invested in let's say in capital in this way, and is not producing enough return. So this is somehow a cost for the budget, because then taxation has to be higher in other places, on other sources, in particular on labor, but also in terms of impact on the economy. Now there's also, I think, and that's what we've invited the government to do, to review all the assets of the government to see what is really has to remain in the government. It is a public function. The rest could very well be dismissed, and this will help to reduce the debt, which is generating interest payments, which is very costly. So there's work which was planned for 2011 has been delayed, but I think there is quite now some progress which has been done, and we hope that will be some strong delivery. Another area is the fight to the grey economy, where in fact we also have invited the government to work hard on this area. I think they've produced a very good tax strategy to fight the grey economy. Some measures have been introduced, some others have been adopted actually this week by the government, by the parliament, like the zero declaration. Yeah. Others are still in the pipeline, but I think that is important because a lot of revenues can come in from this way. There is no need to increase taxes.
But if we look at the consolidation for 2012, what we see in the expenditure side, there is this: we are not finishing the roof for the National Library, we are not building a ship, while in the revenue side we are talking about million incomes coming from photo radars. Yes. Are these really sustainable measures?
Well, these are measures, but measures up to some extent. In fact, you know, when we assess whether the situation is improving in terms of fiscal position in the country, we try to look at measures which are sustainable and measures which really improve the fiscal position permanently. And that's why, I mean, the government now, between the first two packages, which is considered in the discussion in cabinet, and which will be the basis for the budget proposal this week, has included a number of measures, but we don't count all of them for the against the fiscal consolidation, let's say. For example, this ship or the library, these are basically shifting of expenditure from one year to another, because actually expenditure is happening in a different moment. So the government has to take a decision to move the money, but we don't count it as a fiscal improvement. But the rest, there is still, nevertheless, quite many measures which deliver the improvement, and even if we exclude from the counting a number of measures of this type, still there's enough. And we thought that in order to deliver this adjustment to in 2012, to have it, you know, to hit the target of 2.5, which the government has set for itself, I think about 125 million of measures, or this type of measures, so good, let's say, permanent sustainable measures is needed, and broadly within the larger package of measures adopted by the government, there is enough.
Our politicians calms the society, saying that this consolidation is we can say the last big consolidation for the country. Do you agree with that?
Well, what I've always tried to do in the last 3 years is to try to, you know, extend the horizon of governments and of the population. When I've been trying to do interviews or communication, I mean, one should not stop the horizon after the next budget. I mean, one has to see what are the objectives which the country is setting for itself, and I think the first one, the most imperative, is to have fiscal balances, let's say fiscal position which is sound and sustainable, which means close to balance, and which allows your debt to go down, which has increased a lot in the last years. And on top of it, this will help also to qualify for the euro and benefit of joining the euro area. So now what we have in the very short term is the ambition to be below 3%, which is one of the criteria for entering the euro area. But in the interest of the country, some more is needed, because the country will face an impact of aging, because the economy is growing much less than in the past. So I think some consolidation will be needed. It will not be as dramatic and big as done in the past years, and I think it's also foreseeable. So the government has a full year to work on that and to underpin it with reforms, which are important not only for the fiscal outcome, but also for the economy and the society. One important aspect which I would like to stress is that even if the amounts overall are not big, in net terms, I think gross adjustment has to happen. So the composition might change quite significantly, and I think there is scope in the budget to improve spending, to target it better, to give it to the people who really need it, and perhaps reduce spending from, let's say, giving grants or subsidies or benefits to those who don't really need it. And if the country wants to follow in this pattern, which is pretty typical in the Baltic countries, to have a low spending, low tax economy, let's say, with a low public sector intervention, which is fully justified. I mean, it reflects the political choices of the country. I think still would be better to use the little money which transfers through the public sector in a very effective way. I should underline that Latvia is one of the countries with the highest inequality in the EU. And of course, the public sector, with its budget and its policies, can help in this direction. I think there's scope to do more.
Right now, we have this huge uncertainty about the Eurozone, what is going to happen next. Our closest neighbor, Lithuania, no one knows what really the impact could be coming from snow rust crisis. Meanwhile, our government is quite optimistic, saying that, probably next year we will do even better. Is right now there a time to be so optimistic?
You mean even better in terms of growth? Or?
Yeah, that's well.
Well, you're raising a few points. One is the euro, the difficulties in the euro, and the other one is whether the economy is going to be going in this direction, in the direction as expected. Now, on the euro, of course, there is a significant turbulence at the moment, but I like to think in a positive way, which is also what I did 2 years ago in the midst of the crisis in Latvia, that one can see through the turbulence and see that if measures are taken, the fundamentals are improved, the things can get better. And I think the benefits of the euro are so important that even the current difficulties should not undermine the efforts of those who are striving to join the euro. And I think even Estonia can see the immediate benefits they are getting on many fronts. And I think when we go through this adjustment at European level, we'll have stronger instruments, stronger coordination, better integration. I think the impact of having the euro will be even bigger. Now, of course, this turbulence is having an impact on the economy, is undermining confidence in many countries, and even if there is a quick resolution, this impact will be felt for a while in the economy. And that's why we have just published the forecast from the European Commission, and they foresee a rather subdued growth in this quarter and the next. And then a pickup. That, of course, has led us already to revise down the forecast for Latvia. We had in the previous memorandum 4%, now we have 2.5%. I think one can argue that the Baltic countries are on an upward trend, which is very strong, but let's say international developments are pretty significant, and so 2.5% is possibly the central scenario. But there are risks on both sides, I can say, which are not indifferent, and that's why we've encouraged the government to be prudent and let's say take this as a reference for the macroeconomic scenario and aim for a little bit more ambitious target than just be at 3%. So that's where the 2.5% comes from, because there are surprises on the macroeconomic side, but there are surprises also on the fiscal side, and we have seen several times that there are small surprises, and then with the negative fiscal impact, and it's good to have a little buffer to digest it. Now, it's important also to have this buffer. When you look in the perspective of 3 years, because in the discussion sometimes we are accused, we are giving up to the occupants and all that we are doing more effort than it is needed. In fact, I stress all the time, you're not doing it for us, you're doing it for yourself, because every outcome which is better than you expected is actually making your life easier for the next year. You have less to do. So you're just anticipating the pain, but then you have really more scope to do better afterwards and to enjoy afterwards.
One of those unexpected surprises was Krājbanka, I guess for quite many people. First, the question is probably from two sides. First of all, how would you evaluate the way Latvia dealt with it? And the second one, what happened with Krājbanka? Give some kind of concerns about probably a little bit about the bank system in Latvia. Not as all together, but some kind of uncertainties probably. Is this really the right time when to sell Citadel and LMB Bank? Meaning, is this really the time when we can get the biggest amount of the money we would like to have?
Well, okay, again, there are two different issues. One is Krājbanka itself. Was it foreseeable? I think it was not really foreseeable that people act fraudulently if that's the case. If I understand that's the situation. So that's, can happen anytime in any field. What is important there, that action has been taken to limit the damage, and that also likely there's some implication of EU action, because we have a European directive which fixed the guarantee on deposits, and therefore people can be reassured, have been reassured very quickly that they are not going to lose their money, and normal people, let's say, and there are big depositors, of course, who are taking risks in concentrating all their money in one bank. That's always a portfolio strategy. One has to see whether it was the correct one. Now, so the money is, so the guarantee is available. Of course, it's a big amount, and therefore the deposit fund, the guarantee fund, had to ask the Treasury to step in. But this is a loan, and that helps to pay everybody, I think, within a few weeks. So that, I think, is managed in a way which is made sure that there is no systemic implication. Now, in terms of governance, of course, one has to see whether all the instruments, let's say, whether everything was set in a way that to avoid such implications. I think our assessment of the last 2 to 3 years has been that a lot has been done after the Parex case, but of course, every new crisis shows that there are some limits here and there, and therefore I think already action has been taken to try to identify, for example, whether collateral which is given to bank is backed by real assets and not by paper. So this is something which has been done. I think, on a systemic point of view, I don't think there is any major impact. After all, it's a small bank. And let's say the damage is contained.
It is a bit different situation than with the Parex.
Yeah, it is very different. The other point is that the government is in a much sounder position. Okay, it is because it's done the job, and therefore it has cash. It can come in. 3 years ago with Parex, they put the money in Parex, they finished their cash.
What about Citadel?
No, Citadel and MLB. I mean, that. In fact, I don't know. I don't see any immediate implication on this, on the sales process on this bank. I think there is no real need to reconsider what has been planned by the government. I mean, if there's been a fraudulent situation, by some investors, I don't see if an investor is buying, why should fear that there's a problem. So I don't see that. I mean, when you buy as an investor, you take the control, so you don't face this risk anymore, which has taken place. And at the same time, I mean, we have made it very clear, and I think the government is doing the right approach. I mean, there is no fire sale implied by these processes. I mean, what was important is now to go and prospect in the market, see who is interested in buying these assets, bunches of parts of the banks. And the bundles are called. And I think once the market is prospected, I think the government can see whether the price is interesting. And if it is not, there is a possibility to go again, and also there is a workout process potentially which can be used if nothing goes in the right direction. But one has to consider as well that holding to the assets for too long also leads to a depreciation. And so one has to take a little bit of wise decision between selling all these assets and also getting out of this business, because it's a business which should not be a normal government business, against, let's say, the possibility of losses which materialize if one waits too long.
About LMB, we have an opinion, people saying that why should we really sell this bank? Because there are many European Union countries who own banks and they can work and there are no problems with that. Why, in case of Latvia, we have to do that? Why do we have to split it in parts and some of them sell?
Well, normally you hold the bank because it's profitable. And this bank has faced problems, unfortunately, related to the fact that it was involved in the mortgage market, and with the crisis in the housing sector, I mean, it has been affected. So that's the first situation. That's why the government had to come in with further money, capital injections, which have been scrutinized at European level under the state aid rules. And in fact, this was declared compatible, provided that the government would just dismiss the commercial part and focus on the development part. Now, originally, a longer period was given until 2013, but since then, new developments have taken place, a new capital injection from the government, and therefore also let's say, realization that there was kind of interference between the two arms of the bank and the development part, which is what the government has been focusing in for the future, because it wants to use this bank as a means to support the economy. Did not have all the, let's say, the management didn't have all the time to focus on this bank, and therefore, at the same time, as I said before, the assets, of course, of this bank, they don't necessarily stay at the same value if you wait very long. So it's good to get to dismiss this part, so that the government is able to focus on the development part, which is a public activity. And I think the government, rightly so, wants to use this with this objective. There is also money coming from the EU, through the EU funds. There's a financial engineering program under this bank, and we really like also to be effective. And therefore, separating the two activities is part already of a process decided earlier, reflecting the losses and the capital injection. It's just now how to get it happening in the most effective way. This was the discussion of the last year. And I think now the government has taken the decisions. There was some delays also related to the election. The decision has been taken, and now the process is ongoing. But I mean, I want to stress there is no fire sale. So the objective in all this process is to maximize the return for the government, but to have a bank which delivers its objectives.
But how big was the risk that if this wouldn't be done, there would be needed further capital injections?
Sorry?
How big was the risk that if this wouldn't be done, there would be further needed capital injections?
Well, already the second capital injection was not foreseen.
Yeah.
So already that is a kind of inconsistency with the Commission decision on the first state aid. So it was, okay, we put some money, but it's the last one, and we're just going to close commercial, and we keep the development bank as it is, focus on that. So already there was this new development which showed that there was a problem. Now. There's been big discussion whether the bank would make more losses in the future or not, whether more capital would be needed. But I think it's a kind of irrelevant discussion. I think the decision is taken. The focus of the bank or the government is on the development bank. There are already, 20 different banks in Latvia which perform a commercial activity. I see really no need for the government to deliver that, to do this. I think it's just occupying the few resources which the government has, because the public sector is already very small, and I think it would be good to deliver other functions which are more important.
I think you will agree that Latvia is a country full of surprises. One of those is Air Baltic as well right now. Mm-hmm. This company is linked to Krājbanka, that's why probably the actions taken right now happened. Do you see that there could be some kind of impact on budget and consolidation because of country overtaking the shares of Air Baltic?
From Air Baltic. Well, first of all, on your statement, a country full of surprises, yes, very much. I mean, over 3 years, many surprises. But I must say that's why it's also a nice country. I like it because it's very a living country. But it's important to be ready to deal with surprises, and that's why I always, encourage to the prudence and to be, and also to deal with them in a proper way, which is systemic way, looking forward, and looking at the sustainability, not being taken by the urgency at the moment. Now on Air Baltic, of course, that's also again fast decisions taken. I mean, sometimes we could have been involved a little bit more by the government, because, as I say, we can ask the right questions sometimes and make the government think a bit more. But I think overall it's a decision which I think has been taken, which leads now the government in basically in control of the Air Baltic, at least for until the moment where the new injection is made, which is supposed to take place by the end of the month. At that stage, we will see whether there is another private investor and what implications there will be for the running of the company. I think the government then has to decide, if there is no private investors, whether to find another investor, whether to run everything on its own, and whether to run it on its own on a smaller scale, so that to reduce the negative impact on the balance, on the budget. So that's what we've been discussing, what would be the different implications. And I think here as well, if the government stays involved in this company, has to decide whether the ambitions are supported by the means, and whether given the means, whether ambitions should be reduced, and therefore whether Air Baltic can be continued in the way of functioning as it is now.
But right now it's hard to say if there is going to be some impact or no.
Well, we knew already that Air Baltic is not going to make profits very soon, so that is already discounted. And in our assessment, in fact, for the budget for next year, we have included that some losses will be there. Now the question is how these losses will be recorded, whether they will be split between the government and the investor, and of course change the size and the impact. So that is what we are looking at. But I think there's already the intention that if the government the government will have to balance the fact to maximize its position in Air Baltic and to reduce the impact on the budget, because next year is an important year, because it will be the reference for us one of the references for us to assess whether a country is complying with the Maastricht criteria.
And the last, we had a party 3 years ago. The party was really high. Is there a time right now to start a new party again?
Well, I must say, you know, when I came the first time in Latvia, it was in May 2009. It was really the crisis. And I had a kind of meter of assessing the depth of the crisis was the queue of people in front of the counter of the Bank of Latvia, people changing Lats into euros. Now, and restaurants were desert. Now it's the opposite. Now there is no queue in front of the Bank of Latvia, but there are queues in the restaurants. So I see again activities starting picking up. Now, of course, it's good to party from time to time. I want us to be able to recognize whether it's, you know, with what you party. And I think rather than using champagne, as it was the case, I think every party last time perhaps you had to use more black balsam as a drink.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.